Hello and happy, beautiful day to you. On today's episode, I want to talk about getting radical healing results, also about the topics of criticism and self-criticism and the impact that they can have, and also some things that you want to do to change to be able to really heal yourself and heal your relationships and your life. And so part of the reason this is coming up is that if you think about last week's episode, I worked with a beautiful volunteer, Daria, who has MS. And if you listen to that episode, then you will recall that she had been working on trying to heal herself and everything she could for over 6 years. And when her and I started working together, at the beginning of the session, I asked her, how numb, what physical symptoms she was experiencing. And she had numbness at her hands at about a level 6. And if you listen to that episode, you'll remember that as I helped her to shift her mindset, the numbness in her hands literally went away. And of course, you see people releasing pain and creating all kinds of changes so we can see the mind-body connection. Now, of course, for her to be able to maintain those results, she'll really need to rewire the mind at a deeper level, and follow through to make it a real lasting change. And that's when I see the body heal itself. And so part of the reason that we're talking about criticism today and self-criticism is just because it is so common for people to care about others and then those other people to feel criticized by it. If you think about going back to the last episode, one of the patterns that we had talked about was in part the pattern of feeling like her mom was criticizing her. But then also the more that we really unpacked it and looked at it even deeper, there's also a feeling like her mom really, really, really cared for her and really wanted the best for her. And I have seen that so often, by the way, where mothers or even fathers, but mothers might want the best for their children so much that they're trying to give them feedback, and it feels like criticism and it feels like wounding. And by the way, this is not just moms. In fact, maybe you've heard the new slang term mansplaining, where men are, giving unsolicited feedback. And I see that all of the time. In fact, I've been playing pickleball for the last few months, and it's kind of something that you'll see, it's kind of a little bit of a joke, because a lot of times, there's some mansplaining going on. And even, it's kind of divine timing, but even last week, there was this beautiful, beautiful being, beautiful, wonderful guy. Honestly, one of the most caring guys in the world. But what he'll do is he has a tendency to mansplain pickleball, and he really wants to help. And by the way, you can't help but love this guy. And at the same time, he in the middle of he's trying to help. And so my point is, all of the time, men and women might have this tendency to want to help, and yet all of the time what can happen is on the receiving end, somebody will feel criticized or hurt or whatnot. And a lot of it has to do with really respect around giving advice or giving information, because when we stop and look at it, this topic may seem so simple because you see it all the time. You literally see people giving unsolicited advice to others all of the time. And what happens is that so often, just like our beautiful volunteer, people then start to feel insecure. If it's not done right, they're feeling insecure or defensive or frustrated, or, going back to the original mansplaining definition, where basically it's a man explaining something unsolicited. And a lot of times it's something that somebody already knows, but they're kind of telling you like you don't know it. And again, it's not men, it's not women, it's all around us. And so on that note, if we think about the awareness that this can affect your health, your life, what do you want to know from this? First and foremost, if you are somebody who does have a tendency to give unsolicited advice, you may want to just ask somebody, hey, can I give you a tip? Can I point something out? Can I this? Because I cannot tell you how often I have seen this backfire in people's lives. I have worked with women with breast cancer who maybe felt like this in their relationships, where they were giving advice to everybody, like giving advice to their children at 20 years old, at 30 years old, at 40 years old. And their children, grown children, were tired of it. And so they pushed their mom out of their life because they just couldn't handle all of the unsolicited advice all the time. Or they limited her. And then because the mom didn't understand or didn't realize, like, because in her mind, she's just helping. She's being helpful and she's doing a great job and she's helping. And so what happens is I've seen this so many times where a mother has been basically kicked out of the family dynamic because of this, and she doesn't realize it. And so I've seen sickness and illness happen from this hurt and this wounding on both sides. And it may seem so simple. It's just unsolicited advice. And yet, when it's given in a way that where people feel criticized or people feel nitpicked or at the wrong time or without permission or whatnot, just like in our last week's episode, people can feel insecure or defensive or afraid of somebody else. And I see it all the time. And I'm saying moms, but again, with fathers as well. All of the time you see that. And by the way, a lot of times what happens for the person who's giving advice, they might not even realize it. Like I was, mentioning pickleball. Like this gentleman who's so nice just has no self-awareness. He's like, if somebody doesn't take his advice, he's like, well, they just can't take the information, or they think they know it all, or like he's offended, or if they can't take advice, or is unsolicited advice, or even he's offended, or he thinks, that person has some issues. And so he lacks the awareness of it. But this is the thing, right? And so it's men, it's women. So I don't want to point the finger at anybody. And by the way, it's not at all about pointing the finger. It's about healing. It's about healing relationships. And again, the reason this is coming up is just because when we stop and look at last week's episode, and I just see this all of the time so much. And if you're somebody who does give advice all the time, you could do it in a different way to respect boundaries or prepare somebody for it, where you say, hey, by the way, can I give you a tip on that? And if somebody says no, respect that. And so that's one simple thing that you could do. Now, on the flip side, of course, obviously, if we get feedback in life, or you get feedback, don't take it as criticism. Just being able to take it and receive it and take it and receive it, but also being able to set healthy boundaries around it. So even communicating to somebody who says, look, I'm happy to get feedback, but can we do it later? Or setting it up healthy ways in a healthy dynamic in a relationship so that everybody can flourish and that it's not wounding the relationship. And again, I know that what can come up in this place is that for somebody who's always feeling criticized, there's going to be some people who are listening to this who are going, oh my gosh, I always feel criticized by my mom or my dad or whatnot. And then there's going to be other people who are typically the advice givers who are going to go, gosh, people just can't take information. And really ultimately what happens is sometimes, especially if somebody's in the middle of doing something, that hurt, that wounding, that nitpicking can come up, and it can feel real. Now, by the way, there are so many patterns regarding this as well. So if we unpack this even further of ways that I see this show up, another one that I see is, of course, you maybe heard me mention on past episodes, but people can be wired to criticize themselves. And for example, a simple but obvious example that I use all the time is somebody can say, oh, I look horrible in this shirt. And somebody else says what? Oh, no, you look great. Well, what happens is if somebody criticizes themselves and then it's met by a compliment, oh, no, you look great, or reassurance, what happens is there's like a positive and a negative getting linked up. And the mind will want to continue to criticize itself. It gets rewarded for it. It's like a dog goes outside and goes potty outside, you give it a treat, right? And so or another example with the mind, if, unfortunately a cutter Somebody who's been through a trauma maybe and cuts themselves and feels relief or euphoria or control or safety from cutting themselves. They got it, linked up. The correct healthy wiring is if somebody felt cut, that would, not be a good thing. It wouldn't feel good. It would feel bad. We don't want to do that. And so criticizing ourselves, we would want that to feel bad. That's not what we want our brains to do. We don't want our brains to be wired to cut ourselves or criticize ourselves. And yet sometimes people will feel like it keeps them safe from other people criticizing themselves too. If somebody says, oh, this isn't that great, they might say it because they feel like it's going to do what? If they can criticize themselves first, then they'll save themselves from other people criticizing themselves. And so this, again, shows up in so many different ways, and I see it all of the time. And of course, setting up a healthy dynamic around this. Now, by the way, another way that I can see all the time a pattern will show up is something like this. I'll see people who have a belief and a pattern even since childhood. Maybe it's a pattern at age 7. That's something like this. It says something like, my mom is always mad at me, or I'm always in trouble, or I'm always being criticized, or something like that. And then what happens, if that's a pattern, it's like they also grow up and tend to do the very thing that's going to lead to that. So in other words, I've seen people before where they feel like, oh, my husband is always criticizing me, or my wife is always criticizing me. And it's like they literally do the very things that would upset their wife or spouse or partner or significant other, whatever you want to call it. But it's like because they have a belief. My partner, my wife, my spouse, they're always criticizing me, and they end up doing that very thing over and over and over and over again. And so their actions can also create it. And so on this topic, I want to invite you to look at this in your life, because I have seen parents who've had children who were sick, and part of the contributing factor, if we look again back at last week's episode, was a lot of feeling criticized, feeling attacked. Not because it was intentional, because all the time the other person is saying, but I'm just giving feedback, but I'm just giving, and it's this unsolicited advice which could feel jarring or insecure. I've seen children who when they're getting always, so much feedback, they start to feel insecure, like, oh, should I not? And they start to feel insecure in self because of this. And so I want to invite you to look at this in your life, and especially with the ones that you love, and even for your own health, and look at just this topic and notice if it's showing up for you. And if so, I want to invite you to just evaluate what it could look like, what you would want to change, and what would make this show up in a more healthy way in your life, in your love, in your relationships. And so just food for thought. I want to invite you. And again, in just the change, what is a positive way that you could move this that might feel better for yourself, but also for others? And by the way, if you did miss last week's podcast episode, I'd strongly recommend listening to it. Our volunteer, Daria, just an absolute gem, a beautiful, beautiful being. And hearing her just get the numbness out of her hands and some of the changes. So criticism was one of those. So there were some other patterns as well, but just hearing her and laughing with her. And it was a really beautiful episode, but I just wanted to kind of go deeper with this topic, just because it is something that I see all of the time. So whether it's criticism towards self or towards others or whatnot, or even if you're somebody, sometimes I'll see people at work where they don't have an ability to just take feedback. So then they instead of, where it's a job, something they need to know how to do, and they can't take feedback, everything feels, negative. And so maybe in your case, maybe that might be the situation for you, is can you take feedback in a healthy way and productive way, where you're not taking it personally, but you're taking it productively, especially if it comes to a job or something that you need to be able to perform at, So food for thought. That's the insight that I wanted to share with you today on today's quick IQ episode. And that said, as always, I ask you to take just a quick moment to hit the share button on this episode. Share it with somebody you love, somebody you care about, or somebody you don't even know, because the more that every single person in our world is happy and healthy and loved and loving, the better this world is for all of us. And so please do take just a quick moment to hit the share button, and please do make a point to have a most loving, wonderful, incredible rest of your day. And I look forward to connecting with you on the next episode. We'll see you there.